Strategy Simplified. Welcome to Season 12, Episode 14 of the podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Japheth Mast. Really excited to be with you today for this live case demonstration. The scenario in this case interview is the Texas History Museum has reported high human resources costs and has hired McKinsey to address this problem. The candidate looking to solve this case is Camiel, who is an undergrad student who plans to apply to top consulting firms like McKinsey, like Bain, BCG, etc. Leading the session is Ryan Boutwell, a previous MBA intern at McKinsey, who's returning full-time as an associate. If you feel stuck in your case prep process, feel free to reach out to our team for some one-on-one coaching. We'd love to get you plugged into our next case prep cohort. We run one almost every month. We'd love to have you. There's a link in the show notes to get in touch and to learn more. In addition, the show notes will also house the video recording of this live case, as well as you can find the chart that's referenced inside the case. All right, let's dive right into this McKinsey HR case interview.
Camiel, are you ready to get started?
Let's do it.
All right, we'll just jump right in. So today we're going to be talking about Texas history, and your client is Robert J. Beef. Robert is the Chief People Officer at the Texas History Museum. We'll refer to them as THM going forward. The THM is the largest museum in Texas and is located in Austin, Texas. This museum welcomes, on average, 6 million visitors annually from all over the United States and the world. Your client's department reported unusually high human resource costs last year and has come under scrutiny by the executive team and board of directors. Robert has hired your team to help address this problem. And for our first question today, I'd like to just better understand how you would approach this problem and what are some of the things that you'd want to look at to get started.
Great. So thank you again for giving this case. I'm super excited to dive into this. So just to reiterate what you said, to get sure that I got all the facts straight, our client is Robert J. Beef, who works for the THM Museum in Austin, that sees around 6 million visitors, both from the United States as well as globally. And recently there's been unusually high HR costs, which have created a red flag for the executive team. And so our job here today is to address these high costs and see what we can do about them.
Yep, that all sounds great to me.
Perfect. So I would first like to maybe ask a few clarifying questions, if that's okay with you. Besides addressing these high HR costs, is there any other criteria for success for a client or any other objectives that I need to be aware of?
Yeah, we don't really have any other specific objectives. Our client would really just like to know where to focus and how to plan for cost reductions in the short term.
Short term, okay. All right. So just to understand the business model maybe then for THM Museum, what kind of museum is this? And does this tailor itself to the broader public, or is this more of a specific interest group that we invite? What in general, like how does a museum operate, and what, seeing as this is a cost case, what are we looking for in terms of major cost drivers as well?
Yeah. So I've got a couple of things for you on that. So THM, or the Texas History Museum, is focused on offering kind of a comprehensive experience to its visitors of the history of the state of Texas. So that's kind of the focus of the museum. They are structured as a not-for-profit organization, and they generate revenues from grants, donations, and admissions tickets. Very specifically, though, our client has asked us not to provide any insights on improving revenue streams because that is not their objective today. However, focusing specifically on your cost question, the department that we're looking at has 4 main areas. So they have artistic employees, security employees, administrative employees, and executive employees that make up this human resources cost that we're looking at today. The artistic staff are salaried, and they are responsible for the various exhibits around the museum. They decide which exhibits are shown and which season those are shown in. The security staff are hired on a part-time hourly basis and are responsible for protecting the museum's artifacts 24/7. So every day of the year and 24 hours a day. The administrative staff are salaried and they work behind the scenes to ensure the museum's operations are running smoothly. And the executive staff are the museum's top leaders, and this would include the C-suite.
Great. So just to reiterate that fact to you, we have four major segments in our HR department: the artistic, the administration, security, and executive. Artistic is seasonal and determines what is shown in the museum. The administration is behind the scenes, operational. Security is 24/7, around the clock, all year long. And the executives include the C-suite.
Yep, that all sounds right to me.
Great. Just maybe to ask maybe larger scale questions in terms of how the museum is structured. So you mentioned it's in Texas. Do we have any information on how, what percentage is global visitors versus what is local?
We don't actually, and it shouldn't be too relevant to our situation today, but I appreciate the question.
Great. And then the final question I would like to ask is, what does the competitive landscape look like? Are there any other new museums in Texas that tailor to the same kind of market, also have like a history themed showroom, or is it currently just us?
Yeah, we're the only one in Austin. There's other Texas history museums throughout the state, but Austin, being the capital, has the most comprehensive one, and that would be this one. So we're kind of considered the gold standard in our state for this particular offering.
Great. All right, with that, I think I have enough information to start drawing up my structure, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, sounds great.
Hey MBAs, we're putting on a special case prep cohort just for you this December 2023. That's right. Join our Black Belt program, link in the show notes, to be a part of this exclusive cohort. We're going to deliver a group training specific for where you're at in the case prep process. So join, check out, learn more about Black Belt, link in the show notes. We'd love to have you join for this MBA case prep cohort. All right, back to the show.
Okay, great. So to understand, I guess, where these costs are coming from and maybe how we could address them, I'd first like to look at the company itself. So the way it's structured and what role HR plays, and especially in terms of the operations of the company. Then I would like to look at understanding the cost, seeing as that was the main focus of our client. So understanding fixed and variable and how HR fits there. And then finally, I would like to look at maybe potential ways that we can address this issue. So looking at maybe like restructuring certain operational costs or addressing other means of compensation. So if that sounds all right to you, I can dive into the three different segments, starting with the company itself. So first, I would like to look at what are our customer segments. So how are we seeing? You mentioned different globally and local, and what kind of revenue does that bring in? Although revenue, is not the focus of this case, so that does not gain priority here. What role does HR play in structuring those operations? So, what are the efficiency rates for the different departments there? How big are the different HR departments? So how many employees? What kind of hours do they work? And has that changed over the last few years? Then looking at our second segment, the costs. So on the fixed side, the labor, the rent, insurance, utility, loans, how does that compare to HR? And variable costs, so the cost of goods sold for our tickets, marketing, commissions, concessions that we have, and what different HR departments are responsible for those different categories of costs. And then finally, looking on maybe ways to address the cost issue, we look at potential options like restructuring or reallocating the different categories of HR we have. So maybe hiring or firing, depending on the need. Then also looking at our compensation systems or our reward systems, many additional employee benefits that we currently uphold, just trying to dive into the smaller details of our current contracts with our employees. So if that sounds good, I would want to give priority to my second segment, the costs side. So understanding the fixed and variable costs for our HR department.
Yeah, thank you for that very much. I appreciate it. You talked about a lot of things there that are very interesting to our client. One in particular is going to be some of the costs associated with our existing HR spend. So what I'd like to do next is I'm going to show you an exhibit, and if you'll give me 1 sec, I'll share my screen with you. And let me know when you're able to see that.
Yep.
So what I'd like to do here is I'd like to start by just calculating the cost turnover in 2022 using this exhibit. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, that looks great. So what I'm seeing here is that the cost turnover is separated by staff turnover, average time by fill, staff count, compensation type, as well as the turnover percentage. Sorry, the smaller letters in the below are really small to read. Okay, so it gives information about how long the recruitment process is in general. And the turnover cost was 1.5 million in 2021. That's interesting. And we're looking for 2022. And so you would like to calculate the total turnover cost for 2022?
Yeah, let's start there.
Okay, great. Let's see. So what I would like to do then is I would take the staff turnover cost. I would divide it or multiply it by the time, how many times a year that happens. So in case of the artistic, that would happen 4 times a year because it's every 3 months. Then I multiply it by the staff count. Then I would multiply that by the turnover percentage. And for the compensation type, I'm assuming when it says salary, that's just standard for the whole year. And that would have to get more specific when it comes to hourly or with bonuses.
Yeah, so I like the way that you're thinking about that, but I actually think there might be a slightly easier approach for you. So instead of using that average time to fill, let's talk more about how you want to calculate the actual number of employees that are turning over each year.
Oh, I see. So that would just be taking the staff count and then multiplying that by the turnover rate for all 4 buckets.
Yeah, let's do that. And what are you going to multiply that by to get to the actual cost amount then?
By the cost of the staff divided by the staff turnover.
Perfect. Let's take that approach.
Great. Okay, so I'll start for the artistic.
Okay.
So that would be 30K in cost times 500 times 2.2%. I'm actually going to do 30K times 2.2 just because that's easier to start off with. So that'd be so that'd be 660 times 500. Okay, so it's 330K for the artistic bucket. That sounds correct. I can move on to the executive bucket.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Yeah. $190K for the executive bucket. already very interesting that that's significantly lower than the artistic bucket.
Yep.
10,000. Is it okay if I round up the 5.7% to 6% for the administration?
Let's keep it at 5.7% actually.
All right, that works as well. So that's 570K for the administration.
Sounds right to me.
Almost it's more than double the executive. Oh yeah. And so that would be around 1.1 million for security cost. That sounds right.
How'd you get to 1.1? Walk me through that math.
So I did 5K for the total cost times the 1.2K for the staff, which gave me around 6 million. And then I divided that by, or multiplied that by 16.67%, which is around 1/6. A little more than 1/6, so that gave me 1.1 million.
Yeah, I think you're pretty close. It's 1 million exactly. That 16.67 is just exactly 1/6. But you're close. The total being 1 million there. Cool. Yeah. So all that math sounds great to me. So what are you seeing here?
Yeah. So what stands out head over water is that security costs are go way beyond all the other buckets. In fact, I think it's almost just as much as all the other 3 buckets combined, which is very interesting. And unless we're guarding very high cost displays here in our museum, I'm unsure if that's exactly necessary. So my intuition would tell me that would be where we could have significant cost reductions. And I would like to dive into why our security costs are currently so high.
Okay, great. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I think you're spot on that our security costs are significantly higher. As we move on a little bit here, what I'd like to do next is I'd like to brainstorm some options for Robert. So he is going to start exploring ways to cut the HR costs, specifically in the security department overall. He recognized the same thing that you recognize. And so I'd like to just do some brainstorming. What are some ideas for him on how he can potentially cut those costs down?
Great. Is it okay if I take a second just to structure my thoughts?
Absolutely. Go right ahead.
Great. So I see three different segments in ways we can reduce our costs in terms of security personnel. The first is I would like to look at the compensation. The second, I would like to look at the number of security HR personnel we employ. And then the third, I would like to look at the different ways we can relocate them. So for the first segment, I'm thinking of making wages more competitive. Perhaps if we look at market trends, we are above what is currently the average salary for security personnel. Or perhaps we are giving very large bonuses or off time that somehow all increase this total cost for compensation for security. Then I would just like to look at the number of personnel we employ in terms of our security. And maybe we can look into part-time options rather than full-time, if especially the main concern is security at night at a museum, or we'd have to consider more serious layoffs. And perhaps synergies are possible with other departments where if some of the other personnel can take over some of the duties for security, that number doesn't have to be so high. And then thirdly, for us, maybe relocation is the way to go. So we can shuffle around the security personnel between different departments if that lowers the compensation. Or we can look within different museum networks if they can be moved to a different museum that has a need for security personnel. So we don't have to do something as drastic as a layoff.
Yeah. And what are some major risks that come with, I'm curious specifically about your reallocation of resources comment. So what are some specific risks that might come with that? And I'll give you an example. So if we shuffle some of our security resources around to some of the other areas to find a way to kind of double up, so to speak, and maybe potentially cut some head count, what are some potential risks that we could deal with if we went down that path? Yeah,
so the first thing that stands to me is that you could create a very negative HR culture within the museum if it feels like we're just cutting costs at all by all means, and we're no longer taking good care of our employees. It could also harm our brand perception if it feels like we are only employing the minimum. And that might come at cost of customer service or just personal care or the feeling of safety for our customers at the museum. And finally, the safety itself, I think, is also a concern where if in Austin crime rates are high in museums and we are displaying high wealth paintings or such, then security might actually be a high need segment in this HR department, and cutting down on them might actually cause security risks.
We'll be right back after this quick break.
Have you ever heard a new digital trend and thought to yourself, okay, does this really matter? Asking the right questions helps you cut through the noise and get down to what matters most. I'm Jim Hertzfeld, host of the What If, So What podcast, where we discover what's possible with digital and figure out how to make it real by asking what if, so what, and most importantly, now what? Subscribe and listen, and together we can turn big ideas into tangible actions so you can get shit done.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely appreciate that perspective. And Robert has actually asked us to provide a formal recommendation. So what would you like to tell him today?
Hey, Strategy Simplified. Japheth here. Really quickly wanted to share about our upcoming Strategy Sprint consulting project happening in January 2024. What is it? First of all, it's a virtual US-based consulting project where you crush a strategic problem for a real-world client in a team of 6. This program is especially transformative for experienced professionals needing a refreshed work experience to cover a skills or experience gap, international students needing US-based work experience, or non-business majors like liberal arts or advanced degrees who need business or consulting specific work experience. Strategy Sprint will help your resume stand out from the crowd. There are just a few spots left for the January Strategy Sprint. Check out the link in the show notes to learn more and to join. All right, let's get back to the episode.
Great. So Robert was concerned about the high HR costs that our company's been seeing this last year. And when we dove into the different departments, we saw that that was mostly due to security personnel. And so my recommendation would be to look at different ways to cut down the cost of security personnel, either through relocation or by employing part-time securities or doing layoffs, so that we can reduce that 1 million cost bucket that we have currently. Some risks that are associated with that is that it would put us at harm for maybe some security risks in terms of protecting our assets in the museum. It could harm our brand perception, as well as create negative cultural negative cultural elements within the employees and the museum. So next steps, I would like to look at changing the contracts we have with our current employees, contacting other museums in our network to see what kind of global best practices look like there and what they are doing, as well as maybe negotiating part-time or layoffs for our security personnel.
Awesome. Thanks very much for your time today, Camiel. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And scene. So I'll dive right in here to some feedback, but before I do that, I'd like to just make sure, do you have any questions for me, Camiel, before I jump in and kind of start providing a little feedback?
No, I'm sure questions will come on as you start talking, so by all means.
Okay. Well, I want to start by saying that you did a great job on this case. I actually wrote this case. I know that it's a little tricky, so I think you did a really good job, and I just want to start off by commending you for that. On the case performance and also with an audience, which I know can be nerve-wracking. So good job and kudos to you. So let's start with the clarifying questions. You recapped the prompt very well. It's very clear to me that you've been through several cases. You kind of get the gist of how this is supposed to go. Your clarifying questions were great. You started off with the goal. I think it's probably the most important clarifying question. You did a good job of making an assumption on what the goal is, as opposed to just saying, "Hey, interviewer, will you give me some information and I want the goal." The one piece of constructive feedback that I might offer is you asked me, I think, 5 total questions. Let's make sure to just keep it to 3 or less, and always try to think about clarifying questions as a bridge. So you have the prompt, which is just kind of a baseline set of information. You know, you're going into your framework. So what do you need to ask me in between to get some more knowledge to inform your framework? We moved over to the framework. Your framework was awesome, man. You did a good job. You clearly keyed in on the costs. You drove the case forward, which I think is very important, despite this being a McKinsey style case where it's a little bit more interviewer led. But you really crushed the framework. You took me directly into kind of what we needed to talk about, which was the cost associated with the HR department. I think the one thing that I would offer on this one is you mentioned revenue, and you were sure to tell me like, hey, we don't necessarily have to prioritize this because our clients already told us that we don't need to do it. But remember, in consulting, we're always prioritizing work streams and thinking about, time versus kind of the reward that comes from that in terms of serving our client. So just be safe and make sure not to put that in there, just because your interviewer may say, we already talked about that and that's not important. But just want to reiterate, you crushed the framework, did a great job. And the last thing that I'll mention really is on the exhibit when we started doing some math. I want to say you did another great job on this. You came out to all the right numbers. And I think that you did a good job of kind of reading the exhibit and clearing the exhibit for me while also kind of clarifying, asking some questions. And the more you talk to the interviewer, the more kind of interactive that becomes. So you did a great job of outlining to me, like, this is the math I want to do. And I said, well, you can do that, or we can do something a little easier. And you're real quick and coachable and said, yes, got it. We moved on. So you did a great job there. The one thing that I'll mention is there were a couple of times that you kind of went heads down and were real quiet. And I know that that's necessary to some extent when you're doing math, but don't be afraid to kind of perk up and say, hey, this is kind of what I'm doing over here. And, does that sound right to you? Just kind of keep me plugged in. Cause don't forget, there's always a human on the other side here too. And, the more you can kind of interact with me and pull me into the interview, the better it'll be. But overall, man, I think you crushed this, did a great job. I certainly am not at the position yet where I'm making decisions, but if this were my interview, I would have given you a pass. So well done.
Thank you. That was really cool. Yeah. And so the question I had towards your advice about the math, you're right that like I guess go quiet just so that I don't fudge up the numbers. Would you just recommend literally like speaking out loud what everything I'm thinking as I'm going through the math, just like saying number by number?
No. So whenever I was in your shoes and I was going through this case process, I developed a personal framework that I've used that's worked really well for me. And basically what I did is probably you're about 75-80% of the way there already, but I would outline in words what the formula is that I want to do and explain to my interviewer why I want to do that. And that would allow me to identify the missing components that I did or didn't have and ask for those. So step 1, lay out the formula in words. Step 2, ask for the missing components once you've identified them. 3 is do the math. And that's where you can say simply, all right, here I'm taking, we have 1,000. Let me go back to here, for example, you could have said, all right, I'm going to start with artistic. We know it's $30,000 per staff member. We have 500. We know that there's 2.2% turnover. So I want to do 500 times 2.2. That gets me 11 times 30,000. You see how you're kind of like talking me through it as you're doing it, but it's not as simple as saying like 30,000 times 11 equals $330,000. Just kind of walking through the process in a little bit less robotic fashion. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And then the 4th step is just tell me what it means. What does this mean for my client?
Yeah. I actually had a few like conclusions drawn out, but you beat me to it where we already were moving on before I could say it. And I'm not sure if I should have interrupted you and been said of like, oh, actually I have a few insights here, or just let the case flow.
Yeah, that's a good question, I think. And that's probably a little bit on me for kind of jumping the gun in some ways. But I would say in general, if your interviewer is moving on, it's probably best practice to kind of let them lead and move on with them. Keep those insights in your back pocket and pull them back out in brainstorming or pull them back out in recommendations. Don't just kind of discard them altogether. But you have to remember too, your interviewers are likely very busy, and there is a chance that they're moving the case along because they're simply just running out of time. Right. We'll never know why it is, but you just probably want to err on the side of caution there and kind of follow their lead.
Okay. The mentioning time was actually something I wanted to ask as well. How did I do in terms of taking time for the brainstorming as well as my framework? Was I within the limits?
So your framework was a little long. It was 2 minutes and 20 seconds-ish. I didn't time it exactly, but I looked up and I think it was about 220 or 225, which I would say is a little long. I think the guidance is going to be somewhere in the 1.5 minute to 2 minute range is kind of the sweet spot. I think that some frameworks are a little bit more challenging than others. And so if it is a more challenging framework, there is the opportunity to go a little longer, but I think trying to cap it at 2 minutes is ideal. In terms of the brainstorm, I'm glad you brought this up because I think you did a great job on asking for time in the brainstorm to get organized, because I see so often that people don't do that. And then they just kind of rapid fire, throw spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. So your position on asking for time and getting a little organized was very, very good. I do think that you took a little bit too much time when you had your head down, but you came up and you presented a very strong framework. So if you're going to take a little too much time, it's best to come out hot and do a great job, which is exactly what you did.
Awesome. Okay, that's really helpful.
Yeah.
Just writing that down.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah, of course.
I think that's the questions I had, but yeah, super grateful for this case and feel like I learned a bunch.
Yeah, man, I think you crushed it. And, like I said, good job on the case and good job on doing it in front of an audience. I don't know that I would have done this.
Yeah, super cool.
As always, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Strategy Simplified. If you are unsure of what you're doing inside of the case interview process, we would love to help. We've got a team of 25 MBB coaches who are willing and able to coach you to interview success. You can join our Black Belt Case Prep program for 8 hours of coaching plus resume edits, or you can grab just 1 or 2 or 4 hours of a la carte coaching at a time. Learn more, link in the show notes for all the details.